Hello, boys and girls, and any history-minded adults out there. I'm Mr. Ben, and I work at the Logan branch of the Gloucester County Library System. I'm not there right now at the library. I'm here at home, but I'd like to tell you a story about someone who's very important in our local history. His name is General Charles Garrison Harker. Maybe some of you even attend the General Charles Harker School. Well, I have a picture that I've drawn of General Harker, and I've been working on a book. You see, I wrote an adult book about General Harker. It was rather a short volume, but one day, little Bobby came to the Logan Library and asked Miss Heather who was General Harker. Now thing is, Bobby attends the General Harker School, and anybody who attends the Harker School really shouldn't have to ask that question. Little Bobby's name was changed to protect the innocent. So, little Bobby asked that question, so I thought, well, I'd write a children's book to illustrate the life of this brave young patriot who died for his country fighting for the Union during the American Civil War. You think things are bad now? Think what it must have been like 150 years ago during the American Civil War. Now, Charles Harker was born in 1835 in Swedesboro, and maybe the town looked a little like this in 1840 or so. There you see Trinity Episcopal Church. It's still standing there, built in 1784 on the main street in Swedesboro. Now, Charles would have lived on Main Street, at least we think in the south end of town, and his father, unfortunately, there's a picture of little Charlie and his dad picking apples or some fruit from the tree. Unfortunately, Charles' father died when Charles was just 4 or 5 years old, leaving his mother to raise a family of 8. Charles was the second youngest of 8 children. Now, eventually, all the children left home, and it was just Charlie and his little sister, Emma. But then Charlie and his mother and Emma moved to Mullica Hill, just a short distance away. And sadly, when Charles was 14 years old, his mother passed away as well, leaving Charlie and Emma orphans. Fortunately, there was a kindly man by the name of Nathan T. Stratton who ran a dry goods store in Mullica Hill and was also a congressman, a New Jersey congressman. And he gave Charles a job as a clerk in his store. And he was so impressed with Charles' behavior and his work ethic that he was able to get Charlie an appointment at the military academy at West Point. There, Charles became a cadet. There is a picture of him in his cadet uniform at West Point, and he graduated from West Point in 1858. Now, as you probably know, the Civil War started in 1861, right after Charlie's graduation. He was a second lieutenant posted to the northwestern frontier when the war broke out, but he was ordered back east to Ohio to a training camp where he was training young raw recruits who came into the camp to be soldiers. Camp at Mansfield, Ohio, called Camp Buckingham, and there's a picture of Charles on horseback training some new recruits to be soldiers. Now, Charles wanted desperately to get to the front. He wanted to see some fighting, and he did. He accepted a colonelcy. He became a colonel of the 65th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. And their first battle was the Battle of Shiloh, fought in April of 1862. Only the regiment arrived late on the battlefield, and they had to spend the night, and it rained all night. But Charlie, who is a colonel, shared a blanket, a wet, soggy blanket, with General Garfield, his superior officer. Now, Garfield, you may recognize that name, would one day become President of the United States. But that night, he and Charles Harker shared a wet, sodden blanket on the battlefield of Shiloh. Now, Charles was a religious man, and he read his Bible in his tent every night, that at least when not on active campaign. And there he is, studiously reading his scriptures, and he would do that when he could. His first real battle, where he saw significant action, was the Battle of Stones River. This particular battle lasted 3 days. It was fought at the end of December in 1862 and lasted until January 1st of 1863. It was a Union victory, but just barely. But during this battle, little Charlie Harker, he was very short of stature. He wasn't very tall, in other words, and the men called him Little Charlie. That's him on horseback there. He always rode his horse into battle so that the men could see him when he gave commands. Now, after that battle, there was a long lull. It was a long time before the next battle, and Charlie had time for a conquest of another sort. He decided that he would visit this one Narcisa Pillow, this young Southern belle, whose uncle happened to be a Confederate general in the Confederate Army. But she was on this, where the Union camp, where Charlie was, they had camped on her plantation, and they started up a friendship which became a courtship. Only, of course, they would never marry, because later on, as you probably already know, Charles was killed in battle, and it was said that Narcissa never married because she had a broken heart. Now, when Charles wasn't a courting, sometimes he had time for a lively horse race. And here are a general and a colonel, and Charles bringing up the rear of this race, but they were some of the finest horse flesh they owned in the army, and Charles was a very good horseman. And there he is riding his horse. But there came a time when, once again, the Army of the Cumberland, which is the army that Charles was a part of, he's now leading a brigade of troops, not just one regiment, and he fought at the Battle of Chickamauga, which was a terrible battle fought in northern Georgia in September of 1863, a two-day battle, September 19th and 20th, 1863. Now, this battle, it was a Union defeat, and half of the Union Army had retreated back to Chattanooga. But Charles Harker had led his brigade to Horseshoe Ridge, where General Thomas, George H. Thomas, a famous Union general, was patching together a line to keep the Confederates from overrunning the Union Army. And here is General Thomas ordering Charlie Harker on Horseshoe Ridge, and he said, "Harker, I will trust you to hold this hill." To which Harker replied, "We will hold it or die." And he was true to his word. They held the hill till nightfall, and the rest of the Union Army was able to retreat to Chattanooga. But the battle wasn't finished yet. In fact, the Union Army was under siege by the Confederates. They were almost surrounded, at least on three sides, and they held the high ground on Missionary Ridge, outside of Chattanooga, and the Union Army was in Chattanooga. Well, one day General Grant came to replace General Rosecrans, and he pretty soon straightened things out and ordered an attack on the Confederate positions on Missionary Ridge. And the Army of the Cumberland fought uphill in this battle. And then this is a picture of, it's in two, of that battle. It's in two, if you can see it or not. And there you have Harker's regiment attacking up Missionary Ridge. When they got to the top of the ridge, they captured some Confederate cannons because the Confederates, or the rebels, as they're sometimes called, all ran away. And General Phil Sheridan, who was Harker's division commander, he was so excited that he jumped on one of the captured cannons and began to whoop it up, swing his legs and cheer. And Harker, seeing General Sheridan doing this, decided he was going to do the same thing. Unfortunately, the cannon was still red hot from firing, so he got a rather hot seat, unfortunately, and much to the amusement of the other soldiers and General Sheridan, he was unable to ride his horse for a while after that, or sit comfortably in the saddle for some time. Now, in 1864, a Union general by the name of, you might have heard of him, William Tecumseh Sherman, decided it was time to attack Atlanta. But in order to get Atlanta, to get to Atlanta, they had to fight the Confederates every step of the way in northern Georgia. This is a picture of General Sherman, who the troops affectionately called him Uncle Billy. Uncle Billy Sherman. He was a little bit crazy, I think. Now, on one of the battles, General Harker, or Colonel Harker, he's been promoted now to general. He went from colonel to general because of his actions on the field at Chickamauga. He was wounded at the Battle of Resaca, and along with two other generals were standing and conferring when a shell fired from a cannon from a rebel gun exploded, and a shell fragment hit Charlie Harker in the thigh. It did not injure him too much, but it was a painful bruise, and the shell fragment actually ended up killing his horse. Now, at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, the Confederates, or rebels, had a very strong position, but General Sherman ordered an attack anyway, and General Harker's brigade was to lead that assault on the rebel position at Kennesaw Mountain. This is June 27th, 1864. Now, as the attack went forward, some of the soldiers stopped, and because of the terrific fire they were receiving from the Confederates and from their fortifications, and General Harker tried to get the men moving again. So here he is at that moment, and he's shouting, "Come on, boys, forward and take those works." Unfortunately, about that moment, General Harker was shot in the chest, through his right arm, and he was knocked off his mount. Some of the men carried Harker back to the field hospital back off Kennesaw Mountain, where sadly General Harker expired after saying his last words, "Have we taken the mountain?" Those were his recorded last words when he died. His body was embalmed and shipped back to Swedesboro, his hometown, where he's buried. Later, the officers and men of his command erected a monument in his memory, and you can go there today to the cemetery near the Trinity Episcopal Church on Church Street in Swedesboro and see his monument there. That is Harker's monument. And a few years ago, the school board, Woolwich Township came to the Swedesboro-Woolwich Historical Society. They said we were building a school and we want to know what to name the school. So the Historical Society suggested that the school be named the General Harker School. And so we have on Oldman's Creek Road the General Harker School, General Charles G. Harker School, and some of you may attend that school. And that's the story of how the school was named after this general that sadly a lot of people had forgotten about. But I didn't want you to forget about him, and I hope you'll remember him. So when you come into the library, one day you'll be able to check out this children's book, I also hope, and you'll know all about General Charles G. Harker, and you'll be able to tell someone else about him. Well, I'm afraid I've gone a little bit over long. Let me just check the time. Oh yeah, I've got to get going. But I hope you've learned something about General Harker today, and we'll be seeing you at the library soon. I trust. Thank you. Thanks for listening.